These rings belong to my sister Renate. She was wearing them when she died, at only 35. The cause of her death was unknown. Years ago, I began this film to find out what led to my sister's mysterious death. But I had no idea it would lead me to an investigation of the pharmaceutical industry and its matrix of control over our society. It's been like putting together pieces of a jigsaw puzzle without knowing what the finished picture would look like. Now that I've seen the big picture, it's vital that you do too. I wonder, how much is a human life worth?
It was once the top-selling antipsychotic drug in Florida.
We're talking about a drug called Zyprexa.
Antipsychotics are among the best-selling prescriptions in the world.
It's FDA approved for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, but it's used for all kinds of things.
Serious adverse effects and deceptive marketing of their antipsychotic drug Risperidone.
Shocking increase in the number of children taking antipsychotic drugs.
I remember the day she was found. My father was the one who broke the news to me. He was silent for a long while, and then, with no preparation or warning whatsoever, said, "Your sister is dead." The day after, still in a state of shock, I went to her room, filming the things she left behind. It was an unconscious act. My last chance to hold on to her.
Hun døde mens hun var på en slags institusjon hvor de tok vare på fordi hun var psykiatrisk pasient, schizophren. Hun var kjempefrisk i tida før hun døde, og det begynte endelig å gå bra for henne. Hun hadde ikke visst noe tegn til noen spesiell sykdom, ingenting i det hele tatt. Så det var veldig plutselig at hun døde. Og det jeg på en måte ønsker å finne ut i denne dokumentaren da, det er vel for det første, hva var det egentlig hun døde av? Hva var det som gjorde at hun plutselig bare var dum, 35 år gammel?
We were three sisters, Renate, Berit, and me, Anniken. Renate was 10 years older than me. As a child, I used to call her Dada, but after I began working on this film, I had to start calling her by her real name. But to me, she will always be my dada. Renate was the coolest person in my world, the one I looked up to. I loved dressing up in her clothes, dancing with her, watching her closely when she was putting on makeup, and spying on her and her friends. And I loved it when she babysat us, because we were always having fun.
Hun prøvde å danne med noen bilder av hvordan det var. Og jeg skulle ha den der. Så jeg valgte egentlig å gå ut og så kikke litt i vinduet. Men det var jo en del rugg på vinduet, så man så plutselig 2 føtter som lå nede på gulvet der. Og da sprang jeg bare inn og så låste jeg meg inn. Og der fant jeg jo Renate da død i stolen. Eller hun lå med hodet opp av stolen, så ryggen lå nedover til gulvet. Og jeg så jo at hun hadde jo låget en stund der. Hun var jo, ja, det begynte å bli litt blå og litt sånn marmorert på filmen.
Altså, vi i familien har lurt på det her i og med at hun lå der så lenge for å bli funnet. Som at antageligvis så døde hun på lørdags formiddag, og så ble hun funnet på mandags formiddag. Så det var jo... Men var ikke det noe sånt at dere delte ut noen medisiner eller sånne ting også?
Jeg jobbet på natt den tiden, så jeg hadde ikke noe med det medisinske å gjøre. Ikke hadde kompetanse på det heller. Og så er det ikke rettferdig. Det var jo ung jente, så det hadde vært for tidlig. Full av humor. Flott familie. Det var flott da.
When Renate's body was found, she was barefoot, wearing a black dress. The image of her in the black dress haunted my dreams night after night. Renate's psychiatrist hadn't made a single entry in her medical records during the last year of her life. To find out what medications he treated her with, I arranged to meet with him. I decided to record it with a hidden camera. It's illegal for me to show you the footage, but I found out that during the last 6 months of Renate's life, her psychiatrist successively increased the amount of medications she was on. When she died, he had prescribed her with 5 medications in high dosages. I asked him if this could have caused her death. He told me that was impossible. I began researching to learn more about the medicines he treated Renate with, the antipsychotics. The first generation of antipsychotics arrived in the late 50s. In the 90s, a second generation of antipsychotics were launched. These included Risperdal from Johnson & Johnson, Seroquel from AstraZeneca, Zyprexa from Lilly, Geodon from Pfizer, and Abilify from Otsuka. During the 2000s, they became some of the most sold drugs in the world. I discovered that 2 years after Renate's death, a warning of sudden death was added to the label of all the antipsychotics she was being treated with.
Hallo, hei du, det her er Anniken Hoel som ringer. Jeg var søster til Renate. Ja, nei, det var jo, det er jo, for vi vet jo fortsatt ikke hva hun døde av. Men altså, for at jeg har jo lest om at det er jo en god del sånn dødsfall som skyldes av den Zyprexa.
Ikke som jeg vet om.
Ok.
De medikamentene vi bruker er jo så godt prøvd ut at vi vet at det som kan gjøre medikamentet farlig, er at de påvirker hjerterytmen, for eksempel. Så at hjertet begynner å slå uregelmessig og sånn. Det er det ikke noen rapporter om, altså.
Men det der som er så rart, for det står jo på det der legemiddelverket at man kan dø for at en av bivirkningene er jo plutselig dødsfall av Zyprexa.
Ja, det visste ikke jeg om, altså. Det må jeg si, det har ikke jeg.
Det står på pakningsvedlegget.
Ok. Ja,
Altså, er ikke du psykiater?
jo.
Burde ikke dere vite at medisinene dere gir til pasientene kan føre til plutselig død?
Jo, det er klart vi burde.
Antipsychotics can cause heart arrhythmia that can lead to sudden cardiac death. But why didn't Renate's psychiatrist know this? I realized that there had to be more stories like Renate's out there. Other inexplicable deaths of people taking antipsychotics. It didn't take long before I learned of another woman who died just 3 weeks before Renate at the same hospital.
Jeg vet at Mart reagerte selv på medisinene som hun nå hadde fått utdelt. Bare kort tid før hun døde, så står det faktisk på en huskelapp at hun skal spørre legen om det kan være bra å blande de her to sortene medisin, og hvor hun også poengterer i denne huskelista si at det her er medisiner hun faktisk ikke tåler. Så det viser jo at selv om Marit som ufaglært stilte spørsmål rundt sin egen medisinering. Og da spør jeg meg hvorfor ikke fagfolkene gjorde det. Hvorfor har ikke vi lover i Norge som beskytter psykiatriske pasienter? Er de mindre verdt? Er det greit at de dør? Det er jo i hvert fall ikke det for oss som er pårørende.
Renate's psychiatrist told me that there are no reported deaths from antipsychotics. But that's not true. I found a list of 126 deaths. I met with Kirsten Myhr, who handles and assesses reports of suspected side effects to the Norwegian authorities.
Altså, hvor mye er det som blir rapportert inn av bivirkningene, tror dere?
Det er under 5% av de alvorlige. Ja. Det har det vært i alle år, og det er ikke blitt noe bedre, og det tror jeg ikke det blir noe bedre uansett hvilket system man innfører.
Så hvis jeg prøver å finne ut hvor mange er det som kan ha dødd, hvor de antipsykotiske legemidlene var en medvirkende årsak, så tror jeg kommer til å få vanskeligheter for å finne noe reelt tall for det.
Ja, det er jo de tallene alle går ut ifra, men det er altså ikke noen grunn til å tro at det er noe mer rapportert enn andre, tvert imot. En andre bivirkning, og da er det altså, hvis du ganger det der med 20 da, så kan du kanskje få det hele tallet. Hvis du sier at det er 5% som rapporteres. Så er det jo 126 rapporter. Så var det da kanskje 2500 da. Ikke 126.
Nei, 2500 i Norge da, kanskje.
Ja, kan det ha vært. Ja.
2,500 possible deaths? Neither Renate's nor Marit's deaths are registered in the reports. So I set up a webpage to find other families who had lost a loved one. People began contacting me from Norway, Denmark, UK, and the US.
So tragic. He was a healthy, lovely, handsome young man. He was 23 when he died.
The stories had a similar pattern. Otherwise healthy people under 45 dying suddenly while being treated with one or more antipsychotic.
We've known that the antipsychotic group of drugs can cause cardiac changes. We've known this for over 50 years.
Psychiatrist David Healy has written several books and papers on psychopharmacology.
It seemed to be a reasonably small problem. It seemed to be that the regulators had taken care of the drugs that were the major problem and had made sure that they weren't on the market. What I didn't realize, what most people didn't actually realize, is that almost all of these drugs can cause some degree of cardiac change. It may not be so bad that the company has to warn that their drug can kill you. It may not be so bad that the regulators pull the drug off the market. But actually, if you end up in a few of these drugs, and they all cause a bit of a problem, you can end up with a very large problem. You can end up just dropping dead.
In 2009, I gained access to leaked internal documents about Zyprexa, one of the medicines Renate had been treated with. At the time, I knew very little about the pharmaceutical industry, and it took me years to sift through the papers and make sense of what I was reading. But one thing was clear. People struggling with mental illness were valued only in terms of how much income they could generate as lifelong customers. Lilly is the company that produces Zyprexa. They are also the makers of Prozac.
It's the hottest psychiatric drug in history. Prozac.
Prozac. Wonder drug that works wonders.
Americans using Prozac right now.
Holiday season in New York City when the drug dealers are selling more Prozac than crack.
Prozac completely changed the practice of psychiatry by allowing depression to be diagnosed and treated by general practitioners instead of psychiatrists or psychologists. Prozac quickly became the biggest selling drug in the history of the pharmaceutical industry. But in 2001, Lilly lost their patent exclusivity for Prozac.
Prozac was your number one selling multi-billion-dollar blockbuster as of that time, right? It was.
This is their annual report when they lost it. So what are we going to do now? We're going to use, as our front line, we're going to start replacing Prozac's business with the Zyprexa business and make it into a billion-dollar blockbuster.
Lilly introduced an aggressive sales program called Viva Zyprexa, with its own theme song, a reworking of Elvis Presley's Viva Las Vegas.
Purpose gonna set my soul on fire. Got a brand named Zyprexa with a whole new chance to get those stakes up higher. Thousands of patients are waiting up there. The way they're living just ain't fair, but you can bet they can get some help from primary care. Viva Zyprexa.
New York Times journalist Alex Berenson has covered the pharmaceutical industry extensively. He was the first journalist to access the leaked documents about Zyprexa.
Most products you can't sell for $5 if they cost 5 cents to make. The reason you can with drugs is because drugs are given monopolies for a period of years. The day that a new drug is approved is a great day for a company, but it also starts the clock to that expiration. And everyone is aware of that. Everyone is aware we want to maximize our profits in that, 13 to 15 to 17 year window for as long, for to get as much as we can, build the market as much as we can.
I don't know if you remember this, which is the...
Oh, yes. This is Zyprexa in primary care, primary care physicians, not psychiatrists, certainly not mental hospitals. We are going to go to your, to your GP.
Lilly used the same strategy as with Prozac. They marketed Zyprexa aggressively to primary care physicians. The difference from Prozac was that Zyprexa was only approved to treat schizophrenia and a rare type of bipolar disorder. So Lilly had to convince doctors and consumers that they were not depressed anymore, but that they were bipolar.
Your doctor probably never sees you when you feel like this. This is usually who your doctor sees. That deeply depressed you who barely dragged yourself in for treatment. That's why so many people with bipolar disorder are being treated for depression and not getting any better, because depression is only half the story. That fast-talking...
Amazingly, Zyprexa became an even greater source of income for Lilly than Prozac had been. But then, it turned out that Lilly had skeletons in their closet.
Lilly pleading guilty to criminal conduct after skating under the radar for years.
There's been rapid weight gain with the drug and elevated glucose, which can put folks at higher risk of developing diabetes.
So what is Zyprexa used for?
Lilly was hit with over $1.6 billion in fines. The reason? They knowingly hid dangerous side effects of Zyprexa and had engaged in illegal marketing practices called off-label marketing. Marketing medicines for conditions it has not been approved for.
Thank you for calling Ihrer Company and Health. The person you are trying to reach is not accepting calls at this time.
Sorry that I missed your call. Please leave a message.
Would be Maurice Sullivan. He's not even trying to leave a message. He's the main contact.
I'm trying to get somebody from Eli Lilly.
Yes, I could have him give you a call back.
And I'll get back to you as quickly as possible.
My mother uses my shampoo.
My daughter uses my shampoo. Johnson's baby shampoo. Oh, baby, baby, there'll be no more.
But Lilly wasn't the only company with skeletons in their closets. Johnson & Johnson, known for their baby products, also manufactured the antipsychotic Risperdal, which they promoted off-label to children on a vast scale. I went to meet Alan Jones, who was a whistleblower against Johnson & Johnson.
mean, they were planning mass marketing campaigns to market these drugs to children long before they were approved. They were rewarding salesmen with incentives for marketing to kids. They were targeting child and adolescent psychiatrists. All those were business plans fully established within the corporate structure itself. The drug companies lied to everybody from beginning to end. So the doctor who treated your sister probably did not know to look for the side effects that might have flagged a worsening condition. He probably did not know that sudden death itself was a possibility with these drugs.
No, yeah, that's what he didn't. He only knew it when I told him.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm sort of trying to get to in this film is I want to find those people who made these strategies in the companies, who knew that this was going to happen.
Corporate CEOs, marketing managers, people who either knew or should have known or who did not know because inadequate safeguards were in place, should be prosecuted civilly and criminally for the death and mayhem and plundering of the public treasury. And until individuals are held accountable, I believe the drug companies will continue to stretch every boundary and every rule that they can.
We are here today to announce that Johnson & Johnson and 3 of its subsidiaries have agreed to pay more than $2.2 billion to resolve criminal as well as civil claims that they marketed prescription drugs for uses that were never approved as safe and effective. Allegations of conduct that recklessly put at risk the health of some of the most vulnerable members of our society, including young children, the elderly, and the disabled.
The biggest fines in the history of the US Justice Department have been levied against pharmaceutical companies. But the people behind these crimes are still walking free.
They're senior executives with pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline at a pep rally in Las Vegas for their sales team.
Who wants to be a millionaire?
The goal to rev up sales is part of what prosecutors say was a culture of greed.
You do the math. There are people in this room who are going to make an ungodly sum of money.
The company apparently spared no expense to entice doctors.
It's hard to say from the company's point of view that these fines ultimately are not just a cost of doing business. Because if you're personally not at risk, then you can do the math and you say, well, you know, we made $40 billion selling Zyprexa over the last 15 years, and the profit on that was $20 billion, and we had to pay a couple $1 billion in fines. Like, that's, you know, that worked out for our shareholders, and that worked out for our executives, and that worked out pretty well. It was not only Eli Lilly, it was not only Merck, it was not only Johnson & Johnson, it was not only Pfizer, it was not only Warner Lambert, it was not only Glaxo, it was all of them. You know, and I'd always read, it was not only Bayer, but, you know, I'd always read this stuff and I'd say, oh, these guys are the worst. And then something else would come up, oh no, these guys are the worst. No, actually, like, we thought Merck was the best and they're the worst. It was like, actually, they're all the same. They all run the same playbook. They all do the same stuff. They all have contempt for the doctors. They all have contempt for the science. They all just want to sell as much as they can.
Did the people in the pharma companies ever consider the human cost of these crimes? I contact several insiders and nobody wants to talk. But one woman who was involved in crafting the Viva Zyprexa campaign agrees to meet with me. But she backs out at the last minute.
I regret that I agreed to
No, actually, I knew that Lily had problems. I didn't know that you personally had been in court.
Well, I had, because I was stupid enough to answer my door when 2 federal agents came by. And with regards to Lily, we did nothing wrong. We were pretty much just following orders. I mean, there's a reason why everybody knows the names Coca-Cola, Marlboro, and Prozac all around the world. There's a reason. It's no accident.
It seems our calls are starting to ruffle feathers. We receive emails and messages from anonymous senders. Who they are, I don't know, but the message is clear. The pharma industry specifically targets groups whose medical costs are covered by the US government, such as children of low-income families, the elderly, and veterans suffering from PTSD. In Charleston, West Virginia, I met with 2 veteran families whose sons both died in their sleep. Both were prescribed with multiple antipsychotics and other medication.
Andrew was prescribed 19, right here. Seroquel, Paxil, Klonopin, Drizeril, Celexa, Lexapro, I can't pronounce all of them, Depakote, Hydrocodone, Darvon, not at the same time, but during an 11-month period. Andrew started taking, 25 or 50 milligrams of Seroquel and was taking 1,600 milligrams at the time of his death.
Oh my God.
800 milligram is a therapeutic max, according to the FDA. And he was taking, prescribed, twice of what he was what's recommended. And it is known to cause cardiac deaths. At that time, it wasn't published that it caused that. Now we found out later that it has. And so we've been on a mission since Andrew died to try to inform people how dangerous the drugs are and find another way to treat PTSD, which we believe PTSD is a natural reaction to a horrific event.
We're talking about accepting what the doctors give us. We grew up in a generation.
Oh, we did.
Where if the doctor said do this, you did it. I mean,
Right.
because doctors were on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. And whatever they said, that had to be the truth.
Right.
When someone you love suffers from serious mental illness, you take on that suffering as well. It's as if your entire family and everyone close to you is falling ill as well. I remember the moment I realized that there was something seriously wrong with Renate. I was 10 years old. She was 20. She began covering her hair with a scarf. I asked her why she was doing that, and with fixed eyes that wouldn't make contact with mine, she said, "God ordered me to do it. If you don't do what God commands, you'll be punished." I couldn't understand what happened to her, because suddenly she was a stranger to me, completely different from my dada. After that, Renate was in and out of psychiatric care over the next 14 years. Several times she was committed against her will. Having witnessed my sister in a psychotic state many times, I understand the need for medicine in such serious conditions. I wanted to find research that proved the positive effects of antipsychotics, so I contacted the largest research institution in the world on mental health.
Hello, hi, good day. This is Anniken Hoel calling. Hi, I called you last week regarding but the thing is that I need someone who are showing some study that are positive. That would be very good.
They couldn't provide me with a positive study. Instead, they sent me this one, claiming that antipsychotics are neither safe nor effective for adults over 40. I found this very strange, because antipsychotics are used by millions every day all over the world. So I tried to understand exactly what these medicines do and how they work, only to discover that the theory behind them lacks proven scientific evidence.
Psychiatrists routinely tell patients that they have a chemical imbalance. So they have an error in their brain, and now we will give a drug that fixes this error. And this is totally wrong. 80% of Danish patients, they believe in this myth. And this is because the psychiatrists have told them this lie. And for example, in depression, the popular saying among psychiatrists is that you lack serotonin in your brain, and this is why you are depressed, so now we'll give you a drug that increases serotonin. But it has never been shown that depressed people have less serotonin in their brain than normal people.
The theory that has enabled the massive use of antipsychotics and antidepressants is the chemical imbalance theory. It claims that mental illness is caused by an imbalance of chemicals in the brain, and the medicines correct these imbalances, and you get well.
We really don't understand the pharmacology of these drugs very well, and therefore we have no idea what they're going to be doing when used in combination. We have no idea what they're doing, when we're just using one of them, especially if we're using one of them for a long time. People have been trying to locate what they assume to be the biological origins of mental illness for many decades now. The research is always reported as making progress, and it'll be just around the corner. We will find it soon, but we haven't quite found it yet.
In the 90s, medical journals were filled with studies and ads about chemical imbalances and new revolutionary medicines. But that tale is no longer being told in the medical journals. So I took a closer look at the ways in which medical literature is manipulated. The pharmaceutical companies themselves control all clinical trials of a new medicine. Around 50% of these trials are withheld by the company, so clinical trials with negative results will not be seen by researchers, doctors, or us. And medical journals often publish only those studies with positive outcomes.
Articles in peer-reviewed journals like the BMJ, the Lancet, JAMA, the New England Journal of Medicine, these are very powerful for affecting physicians' beliefs about diseases, their beliefs about therapeutics, and their practice. They're probably the most important marketing tool that pharmaceutical companies have. So it's quite common for pharmaceuticals to either ghostwrite or ghost manage articles that appear in the medical literature. Marketing messages are given to the writer, and then an academic physician or researcher is asked to author the article. And then there are people who specialize in writing the abstract for an article. Abstracts are not peer-reviewed, and often abstracts do not reflect the actual data underlying the paper. So busy physicians will only read the abstract. And the most important part of the abstract, the conclusion. And so if the last line of the abstract says, that we think that the promise of this treatment will emerge in a later trial, even though it was a negative study, the physician is left with a positive impression of the drug.
The pharmaceutical industry indirectly funds several of these journals through advertising. This brings us to the most important person in the selling of prescription medicines, your doctor, because it's through the doctor's prescriptions that the companies make money.
Do you think doctors are aware of how much they're actually being manipulated?
No, most doctors are not aware of how they are being manipulated. And one of the reasons is that it's very subtle, it's very pervasive. Even a physician who never goes to a drug company dinner and doesn't see drug reps and doesn't accept samples, they are still being manipulated because the information in medical journals is being manipulated. The information at national meetings is being manipulated. The information that academic physicians are giving to community doctors is being manipulated. So even a very honest, well-meaning, ethical physician is still not getting the information that they need to practice the best medicine. And industry will always promote the benefits of drugs and minimize the harms of drugs.
Pharma companies employ thousands of sales reps who pay regular visits to your doctor's office to market their products. The sales reps have one goal: to make your doctor prescribe the drug they are marketing. They arrive with free lunches, invite doctors to dinners and conferences, and distribute promotional materials. No medical background is required to be a sales rep, but they are trained extensively in selling techniques. While marketing Zyprexa, Lilly created patient profiles to help sales reps teach the doctors to discover the Zyprexa patient. These profiles could be each and every one of us during a challenging period of our lives.
I was trained to go in, talk about the symptoms, not to say bipolar or schizophrenia, because the first thing they would say to me is, I don't see bipolar patients. But when you start to ask, well, do you have patients that are having these symptoms, and this symptom, and that symptom, and this symptom? Yeah. Well, that is consistent with bipolar disorder. The primary reason that this patient would come in, I can't sleep. I need something to sleep. And the primary care physician would give them something to sleep, which wouldn't help the problem, because the reason why they can't sleep is because they can't turn their mind off, and the reason they can't turn their mind off is because they have bipolar disorder. Now, I know you say as a layperson that doesn't sound like bipolar, but I'm not talking to a layperson, I'm talking to a doctor. And so you have to dig a little deeper, and that's what I was there to do, is to talk to doctors. Okay, yeah, you see this one symptom, and it could be this, it could be nothing.
But I guess that was also the problem, because first you have to have a qualified opinion and be given a diagnosis, and often these symptoms
Not
have to be there.
necessarily. Doctors can do really what they want. I mean, they can write Prozac for toenail fungus if they feel it's going to help.
The concept of selling sickness is very important in selling pharmaceutical drugs. There are many more people who are well than there are people who are sick. So the best way to sell drugs to the broadest audience is to make people who are well think that they are sick. So pharmaceutical companies go to a great deal of trouble to create diagnoses. This is particularly the case in psychiatry, because in psychiatry, all diagnoses are subjective.
Most psychiatric diagnoses we know, like bipolar disorder, ADHD, PTSD, MDD, originate with the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The DSM defines the criteria for mental illness, and with each new version, new diagnoses are added. The DSM is a creation of the American Psychiatric Association, but is used worldwide by psychiatrists, doctors, and others. As the bar for what qualifies as mental illness continues to be lowered and more diagnoses are added, the DSM in essence creates the market for psychiatric medication. And 2/3 of all the psychiatrists who worked on the recent editions of the DSM had financial ties to the pharma industry.
If you look since 1987, which is when Prozac comes to market, it's since then that we've had this explosion in the use of psychiatric drugs here in the United States, but really in other countries too, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Europe, etc. And the thought is when you get effective drugs and more people get treated, the burden of that illness should either, hopefully at least stay the same in that society or even decline, right? Because more people are being treated and the drugs are said to be safe and effective. But steadily, what you see in the past 25 years in the United States and in society after society is the burden of mental illness is going up dramatically. And the way I measured it is looking at the number of adults on disability due to mental illness, people who could no longer work and need a government payment. Well, in 1987, there were 1.25 million adults in that category. By 2007, it was 4 million people, so it was a tripling. Now, in that time, our societal spending on psychiatric drugs rose from $800 million to more than $40 billion, a 50-fold increase in spending. And what do we see? Rather than the burden lessening, this dramatic increase in disability. So that's specifically the epidemic, the increasing numbers of people disabled by mental illness in this modern era of psychopharmacology.
Alan Francis, a former editor of the DSM, told me that the industry even creates and promotes diagnoses not included in the DSM.
Bipolar in children is an absolute shame and disaster. This was suggested for DSM-4 and rejected. The suggestion was that in children, bipolar disorder developmentally presents itself differently. Instead of having clear-cut episodes of mania and depression, the children would be temperamentally irritable, might have conduct problems. We rejected it. Not enough research, and also it would misidentified lots of kids were temperamental as having bipolar disorder. The drug companies did an end run. Even though the diagnosis was not included in the manual, they financed thought leaders in the field from Harvard University to go all around the country convincing pediatricians, family doctors, GPs, and child psychiatrists that childhood bipolar disorder was a vitally important, underdiagnosed aspect of childhood. What happened was an increase in childhood bipolar disorder of 40 times. And the use of antipsychotic medication, sometimes in kids as young as 2 or 3. Absolutely absurd to think you could diagnose bipolar disorder that early in life. Absolute shame and disaster.
When I interviewed psychiatrist David Healy in Wales, he read me some passages from a book intended for children around 4 years old.
Brandon goes to see Dr. Samuel. Brandon, Dr. Samuel said, I want to tell you something. You have bipolar disorder, the doctor said. By what? Asked Brandon. Bipolar disorder, repeated Dr. Samuel. You see, the way we feel is controlled by chemicals in our brain. In people with bipolar disorder, these chemicals can't do their job right, so that their feelings get jumbled inside. You might feel wonderfully happy, horribly angry, terribly sad, or extremely irritated all on the same day. It's very scary and confusing sometimes. Will I ever get better? Sighed Brandon. That's the good news, smiled Dr. Samuel. There are good medicines to help people with bipolar disorder. What you've got here is converting a normal experience into an illness that doesn't exist, for which you're going to get a treatment that's likely to kill you.
What I remember most about Renate is her smile. When Renate was 25, she met the love of her life. A few years later, they became parents to a beautiful girl. The whole family was overcome with joy. But Renate was too ill to keep custody of her little girl. Her smiles became rarer, and she slipped deeper into herself, to a place where I couldn't reach her.
Welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels, the democratic centre of the European project. This is where the members of Parliament, elected by you, pass European laws.
In Europe, we have the tendency to think everything is worse in America. But this is a global industry, and its practices affect us all. Our authorities, both in the US and Europe, have approved the antipsychotics without discovering their real dangers. So who approves our medicines? I always believed that it was the Norwegian Medicines Agency that approved medicines in Norway. But most medicines in Norway are approved through the EMA, European Medicines Agency. Norway has no formal decision-making authority within the EMA, which is an agency of the EU. The regulators don't do any independent testing of medicines prior to approval. All research and testing is designed and conducted exclusively by the company seeking approval. The EMA only reviews the data the pharmaceutical company presents to them. Based on this, they make a simple analysis. Do the benefits outweigh the risks? The Zyprexa approval was based on 4 clinical trials of 3,000 people over a mere 6 weeks. Trials lasting little over 1 month for a drug that most people will take for years. Patients given Zyprexa showed slight symptom improvement over those given placebo or other antipsychotics. There were side effects, but they were deemed minor, so the benefits outweighed the risks. Many of Zyprexa's dangerous side effects, such as diabetes or sudden death, didn't show themselves during the trials. The real dangers only became clear after Zyprexa was introduced into the population at large. This is how it works with nearly all medicines on the market. It is only after they have been approved that the real side effects are known. So we, the consumers, are unknowingly the guinea pigs for new medications. It took me 2 years to get an interview with the EMA, but I did get one with their senior medical officer. Where should we place the responsibility when something like this happens? And I mean, here is thousands and thousands of people who have died.
Some hardship, some damage to patients, as regrettable as it may be, as it is unavoidable. Now, having said that, there may be situations where someone doesn't live up to their responsibility, whether it is the doctor or maybe even the patients themselves because they take the wrong dose and they take it irregularly and undisciplined, or whether it is the pharmaceutical company or the regulator because they don't pick up signals. That may happen. But it is very difficult to say there is in general this responsibility it wasn't met. We regulate medicines. We do not regulate the practice of medicine. It is a judgment call that has to be taken by regulators in the best interest of patients.
But
we
you
also have to be honest.
You don't know the risks.
You never know all the risks.
Well, then how can you say
there's risk-benefit balance then? It doesn't make sense.
The known benefits and the known risks. We have to be honest. And I think we all have to accept as a society, whenever you bring a drug out, there will always be unknowns.
So the EMA makes a judgment call based on benefits versus risks. How did they measure the value of the lives that would be lost? The pharmaceutical lobby in Brussels is powerful. They declare to have spent over 40 million euros lobbying in 2015. The pharma lobby enjoys easy access to decision makers and offers expert advice on EU laws and the drafting of regulations. And after years of trying to get an interview with someone from the industry, I finally succeed with the head of Europe's Pharmaceutical Lobby Association, FPA.
We still are not transparent enough about how we go about things, the fact that medicines are developed in partnership. When you see on TV, you see usually a man in a white coat talking about how this was developed, the fact that there's a company behind, and the government is involved as well. This is not known. You think that this is some researcher doing this, but you know, a researcher at Oslo University or whatever doesn't have 100 million euros lying around for a clinical trial. No. So all of this is coming from the industry.
Yeah. So let's go back to the system of getting drugs approved. If we look, for example, at the antipsychotics, how could it have been approved in the first place and not discovered that prolonged QTC was a side effect and that sudden death was a side effect?
Sometimes we just simply don't know. Sometimes we find out rare side effects once you're out there in the market. And the reason why is because we still do not know enough about diseases. We don't know why if you give antidepressants to someone, there's only a 50% chance it will work. Why is that? Is that because we are stupid? No, we're not stupid. The regulators are not stupid. The doctors are not stupid. It's just that we don't know enough about the science. We don't know enough about this disease. This is both the beauty and the frustration with science, is that you have a study that concludes this, and then you have a study that concludes this. I mean, if you take all the advice we get on nutrition, are you a little bit lost, as I am? Salt, good or bad? I don't know. Now, what I'm happy about is we have these regulatory agencies that really control the products and what you can say about them, okay?
%87% of EMA's budget is funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So the controllers are paid by the very industry it is meant to control.
The people who are supposed to control the public good to make sure the medicines are safe and they work, many of them worked for the pharmaceutical industry themselves beforehand, or when they leave their jobs will go directly into the pharmaceutical industry. This happens with the FDA in the United States. It happens with the EMA, and this is scandalous. So unless we have independent controllers, the whole scientific methodology of whether our medicines are efficacious, whether they work, whether they're safe, has been broken. And we're dealing with a broken system.
I think Renate's deepest sorrow was that she was unable to be a mother to her daughter. On her daughter's 4th birthday, my aunt and I went to visit her. The nameplate on the door had both Renate's and her daughter's name. A pair of children's shoes were in the hallway. Renate is happy to see us, and she hasn't forgotten that it's her daughter's birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Renate's bought a birthday cake. She sets the table for the 3 of us and her daughter. She cuts the cake and puts the first piece on her absent daughter's plate.
Birthday, dear. Happy birthday.
I'll never forget the image of the uneaten piece of cake still on the plate when we left. It's impossible to determine the accurate number of deaths caused by antipsychotics. Scientists estimate at least 200,000, but I keep finding reports on deaths. Experienced a cardiac arrhythmia. This 12-year-old treatment of bipolar disorder began 6.5 months prior. This 12-year-old female, this 7-year-old male experienced a cardiac. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is the regulator in the US. Families who had lost a loved one tried to warn the FDA about the deadly side effects in this hearing from 2008.
I am the widow of Sergeant Eric Lane. I found my husband dead when our son Seamus was 17 months old. I was 6 months pregnant with our daughter, Jubilee. Eric and I both served in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Eric did not want to take the medications, but the VA could not accommodate his work schedule for therapy. Eric was told he would get his life back once the VA got his medications right. This video is of my husband on Christmas Day. Wake up, Eric. Eric, wake up. Eric. Eric, it's Christmas, wake up. That was 45 minutes to an hour after taking his prescription medication. He had nothing else that day. Thank you.
This hearing was to vote on the approval of expanding the use of the antipsychotic Seroquel for people with anxiety and major depression disorders.
I had a consistent no vote, Bob, on the safety issues.
I voted no because I think that there are safer alternatives for primary therapy.
Wayne Goodman, I voted no for similar reasons. I think the bar needs to be higher for this medication given the concerns we have.
Margie Lawrence, I voted no for very personal reasons because my son died last summer having schizophrenia with sudden cardiac death, and Seroquel was part of his cocktail, so I'm voting no.
The safety committee voted against it, but the FDA division director, Thomas Loughran, overruled their decision.
I can tell you that the division has concluded, based on our review of the data, that the sponsor has submitted sufficient data to support the conclusions that Seroquel XR is effective for both the acute and maintenance treatment of both major depression and generalized anxiety disorder.
Why would a man whose job it is to ensure that Americans get safe medications go against his own safety advisors? I started reviewing other FDA approvals, and there seemed to be a similar pattern.
The FDA has increasingly come under the influence of the pharmaceutical industry, and the key year when this began was 1992. In 1992, there was a budget difficulty, just as there is now, and instead of figuring out a way of raising taxes on wealthy people, for instance, and appropriating more money for the FDA, they said, aha, the easy way of taking care of this is to have the drug industry pay the FDA directly to do drug reviews. And it's greatly changed the relationship between the FDA and the drug industry.
Hello, hi, this is Anniken Hoel calling again about this documentary film about antipsychotics. I've gone through the material that you've sent us, and I have a few other questions.
What specific
We're specifically interested in Mr. Thomas Loughran. So mostly we would like to have an interview with him.
Actually, he retired Friday.
Really?
He's no longer here.
Okay.
Well, honestly, off the record, there's been a lot of accusations made that are just simply not true. And Dr. Loughran has been questioned and accused of things before, and none of it has ever come to be true. And none of his supervisors have ever found any truth in that.
There's a lot of stuff when you start to look into this, and it's just impossible not to question what's going on in the FDA when you really look at the details here.
I know the answer you're going to get, and you're going to get that there has never been any reason to believe anything is going on.
After Thomas Laughlin resigned from the FDA, he began working as a private consultant to Lilly, Pfizer, and other pharma companies, advising them on how to have their medicines approved by the FDA. Open Secrets is a research group that analyzes financial influence in American policies and politics.
How is the pharmaceutical industry or their lobby compared to other industries? Or could you say something in general about
Sure.
it?
The pharmaceutical lobby is actually the largest industry group as far as sort of the industry represented in Washington. So it is larger than the defense industry, larger than the education industry, larger than the agriculture industry. It's larger than the financial industry, and which is a big one. And so they spend or have spent just under $200 million in 2014 through October lobbying members of Congress, and that's more than any other industry.
So this means that the Congress has oversight over the FDA.
So I think that the FDA is actually overseen by the president, but Congress will write the laws that the FDA then has to enforce or regulate. And lobbyists are involved in all parts of that process, both from getting the members in Congress who they want to helping write the laws to debating with or helping craft the regulations. So all of that is influenced by lobbyists. We can identify whether or not those lobbyists used to work for the federal government or for a member of Congress. And about 3/4 of the lobbyists from this company did used to work in government.
Is that this revolving door syndrome?
Yeah.
Okay.
That is the revolving door.
Over a long period of time, I was in contact with a former FDA drug reviewer. He was reluctant to meet me and seemed nervous and insecure about exposing what he had experienced while working at the FDA. He tried to blow the whistle to Congress, but his efforts were met with threats.
Do you feel that in your time as a drug reviewer, there were things that you saw that actually could have saved lives?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was at the FDA for 10 years. And at one point I calculated that I caught a safety issue on average once every 6 weeks of some sort. And I'd had a number of safety issues, major safety issues that had been repeatedly dismissed. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of money involved. And I saw a lot of things in my time at the FDA. There's a lot of good people there. There's a lot of good people. You don't see the good people getting promoted. They basically, a lot of them either leave or they decide just to keep their heads down. And they may even write their reviews and say, I think this is an issue, but then what happens is almost invariably issues just, well, we're management, we don't agree with you. And so long as you don't push it, you're allowed to continue with your career. Tom Laughlin, the division director, is heard yelling down the hallway that our job is to approve drugs. Everything that I have seen is ultimately designed to get drugs to market quicker and to provide less safety oversight.
Thousands and thousands of people are dying, and nothing is being done to stop it.
Yes.
Nothing is being done to talk about it. And there were people who knew from the very beginning that this would happen. If I make that assumption, do you think that I'm right?
I think so. I think so.
I come to the floor to address my colleagues about a federal agency that has forgotten that this federal agency is supposed to be working for the American people.
Republican Senator Charles Grassley is one of few senators who dared to take on the pharmaceutical industry and the FDA. Paul Thacker worked as an investigator for Senator Grassley, exposing industry-wide corruption.
People who tell you that crime doesn't pay, they've never stopped to ask the question of which crime are you talking about. Robbing a convenience store doesn't pay, but selling a crappy drug that kills people and you make a lot of money, that pays. We had a jet fly into the World Trade Center and we lost like 3,500 people and the whole country freaked out. I mean, just on one drug that I looked at alone, it was 83,000 excess heart attacks. No one's up in arms over that. Like, no one's like trying to change, national policy over that. So people don't care enough yet. Like, people aren't pissed off enough yet, and until the voters get angry, then things are gonna stay status quo.
Generation in which facing the emotional upheaval that comes with hitting puberty has meant being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, ADHD, depression, anxiety, or schizophrenia, and subsequently medicated with brightly colored capsules and better tasting pills.
Chemical imbalances are a lie, and the DSM-5 must go.
DSM is a book of bias, not science, that needs to be dismantled.
Psychiatry is a threat to itself and to others. Occupy mental health. Occupy psychiatry.
What do we want?
Human rights.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Human rights.
When do we want it?
Now.
Today, label-free and in recovery, I am genuinely connected to a sense of who I am and of what I believe in, and I experience my emotions with beautiful knowledge that I am no different, no better, no worse than anyone else. The profound anger I have today for those still labeled and still trapped within the biomedical paradigm of psychiatry is a healthy one that fuels me and motivates me to do whatever I can to make a change. We are here waiting for you to walk together on this journey towards equality and justice for everyone, regardless of how uniquely each of us experience this complicated, painful, and unbelievably beautiful thing called life.
It was during my interview with the head of the European pharma lobby in Brussels that I came to understand how we are at the breaking point in history. Because the pharmaceutical industry has new plans for us and our future.
So we are moving big time to something we call targeted medicine. So all these projects now, which are in diseases like schizophrenia or depression, are looking different. You're not selecting patients based on signs and symptoms. You're actually doing a genetic test, or you test, blood sample or something. You will find out the reason.
The reason why they are schizophrenics? From a blood test or a genetic test?
Yeah.
Okay, but earlier you told me, we do not know enough about the brain. We don't know how it works, and we do not know what causes depression or schizophrenia or anything. The atypicals or the antidepressants were based on a specific science that says we know what causes this disease, and this molecule works on the dopamine receptors.
Or knowledge of the science at that time. But now we're starting to figure out what is the real reason.
Okay, what is the real reason?
Well, that's why we have this science project. We don't know yet. It could be a mutation.
Okay, good.
It could be a mutation. It could be a mutation. I can find the scientific papers and send to you.
I would love to see it.
All these diseases are going to be caused by something. Either it's a wiring problem, physical wiring problem, that maybe some neurons are not connecting enough. What are you going to do about that? Maybe you have to go in and engineer it, okay? Nano-engineering, really exciting. In the really long run, you can do gene therapy, which means that you will be able to pick this up, when in your children or when you grow up,
So that means if I had somebody in my family who had schizophrenia, you could just take a gene test and you would say, yeah, you probably will get it too?
That's the future. The science is extremely exciting.
When lobotomy was first introduced, it was heralded as a great advance in science. But now lobotomy has been condemned. When we look back at the age of psychopharmacology, how will history judge us? In the future, it will be even easier to get unsafe medicines approved. President Trump has already begun to deregulate the FDA, which will affect Europe and the rest of the world. We have to stand up against this. The way we treat mental illness today must be fundamentally changed, where the human being comes first. At this very moment, someone's heart beats for the last time before he or she becomes yet another number of the unknown body count caused by antipsychotics. How many more will have to die? Why are these lives without value? Your daughter has grown up. She's 18 years old. You would be so proud of her if you could see her now. She looks so much like you. The last time I saw you, Dada, you were standing in the doorway after I came to visit you. I can still feel the touch of your cheek on mine when you hugged me for the last time, and your smile when you said, "Love you." After walking a few steps away from the house, I suddenly turned around and looked back. You were still there, waving and smiling at me. How I wish I could freeze that moment, run back, and hug you just one more time. Tell you how much I love you one more time. Say goodbye one more time. This is my last goodbye.